evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. So this evening's debate, in fact, I'm going to be debating with Mike Buchannan about whether marriage is a good idea in general and for men in particular. So that's going to be an interesting discussion coming very soon. Just before we get there, you might have seen videos coming out from the family party earlier this week about the Scottish government's sordid sex survey that they've been putting out to schools, gathering information about the sex lives and sexual experiences of children and young people in schools. And I made another video as well about the other aspect of that questionnaire, where it's inviting children to rate their parents for various things and really quite intrusive questions about family life as well. It's part of the course, really, for the SNP. I mean, just other things. I don't know if you've had one of these recently. I think it's the season for the MSPs to be sending you their little newsletters, taxpayer-funded newsletters. They're not allowed to put the party name on them, but the Labour ones are red, the SNP ones are yellow, etc., etc. So it's basically free advertising for them. So this is full of telling me about what a great job a couple of the local Labour MSPs are doing. So this is all at taxpayers' expense. So look out for those. I think it's quite unfair that the MSPs have decided among themselves that your money will be spent on promoting them to their potential voters. Anyway, look out for those coming through your letterbox very soon. There's one more thing to mention about things that have been in the news. Someone sent me a link to a BBC podcast this week, and it was about elephants. And it was about the way that when elephants growing up, young male elephants in particular, when there's not a male adult elephant on the scene, then their development is quite disturbed. And in some cases, they become very violent and erratic and go and attack the rhinoceroses ferociously, etc. So there's been research done into this. It's quite clear. And in the podcast of the BBC, it went on to say basically, and it's exactly the same with humans as well. When there's the absence of the male role model in the home when someone's growing up, then these same psychological problems can manifest as well. That's good, very interesting, very good. But I thought all that would take with the BBC, it would just take someone to say, by the way, do you realize that what you're saying there, that's implying that maybe like two mums bringing up a child isn't ideal, or a single mum, that's not ideal. As soon as the BBC heard that, they'd realize what they were doing, and that podcast would be deleted in no time. But it's interesting, the truth got through without them realizing what they were doing, without them realizing just how controversial what they were saying is. Right, a couple of things to mention coming up family party-wise. We've got a meeting in Peterhead on Thursday this week. That's gathering at 7 for 7:30. Look out for details on social media tomorrow for that. And then on Friday, no, hang on, right, that's Thursday night, yeah. Then Friday, 1:30, we're doing some leafleting in Aberdeen. So we're gathering at the Castlegate at 1:30 p.m, and we're going to give out some leaflets and try and have a chat to some people in Aberdeen. Wednesday next week, not tomorrow, Wednesday next week, there's a strategy and planning meeting in Glasgow to which all members are invited. That's a members-only event, so members, check your emails, the details of that. They've already been sent, but I'll send a reminder as well. Hopefully see a good number of you in Glasgow next week as well. Right, this evening's special guest is Mike Buchannan. Now, Mike Buchannan runs an organisation, there's also a political party, Justice for Men and Boys. He's down in England. So Mike is a men's rights activist, prominent men's rights activist. Now, there's lots of issues we could have talked about tonight on which we would be in complete agreement. And so I think Mike's going to come back in a few weeks and we'll talk about some things that we agree about. But tonight, no, we don't agree at all on this one. Mike thinks that basically people shouldn't get married, men in particular. He's got reasons why getting married is a bad idea for men. And obviously, from the Scottish Family Party perspective, we think completely the opposite. So this is going to be a very interesting debate. I can see lots of comments coming in. Okay, so welcome everyone. I can see the regulars. I can see some other people as well. There's some new people. So do chip in with comments. We'll try and reference those as we're going along. So first of all, I will welcome Mike. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
It's a great pleasure, Richard. Thank you for inviting me. And especially for talking about one of my favourite subjects.
No. Yes, I mean, Mike has actually written a book on this topic. The Marriage Delusion, Fraud of the Rings is the subtitle. So it's covered a lot of those things in the book. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite Mike to kick off, to make the bare bones of his case against marriage. Then I will sit here scribbling away, making notes, and then I'll come back, and then we'll have a backwards and forwards through the time together. So Mike, take us away. Tell us about
Thank you very much, Richard.
Your case.
I asked you just before we came on if you'd ever made a parachute jump, and you said, like I suppose the overwhelming majority of people, that you hadn't. Well, imagine, Richard, that you're about to take your first parachute jump, perhaps to raise funds for the SFP, and you're 7,000 feet in the air. There's a line of three or four men, and they're about to jump. When it comes to when someone comes along and basically explains to you that the pilot has just had notice that 50% of there's a quality issue and 50% of the parachutes will not open. So anyone who jumps has a 50% chance of falling to a certain death. Now, the man at the front of the queue, after hearing this, says, "Okay, great, or acceptable," and he jumps. Now, would you think that man was crazy, irrational, both? In my view, and in the view of most MRAs, I think, that man is every man in the UK, and in fact, most of the Western world, who marries today. Marriage is not a contract anymore and has not been for a very long time. A contract doesn't exist when one of the parties can unilaterally withdraw from it. And it's no accident that 3/4 of divorces are filed for by women, because of hypergamy, where women always like to marry up if they can. A lot of women are financially advantaged through divorce. The state basically incentivizes women to divorce. And I'd like to come on to 3 paragraphs about family courts from a book by one of my party's advisors. So I'm sorry, it didn't come across very well here. But the advisor is Stephen Baskerville, an American politics professor. It's titled A Gentleman's Guide to Manners, Sex and Ruling the World, and it was published last year. I'd just like to read out, as I say, Richard, 3 paragraphs, which I think I've never seen family courts described so well. This is page 175. You must further understand that the divorce courts are not unfair or inefficient, and the judges are not biased or stupid or in need of education. They know precisely what they're doing, and they do it with ruthless efficiency. They may mouth feminist cliches one moment and then turn around and profess pieties about traditional motherhood the next. But these simply rationalizes what really drives them, which is money and power. The courts are run by venal judges, lawyers, and civil servants who are all united in one objective: to take control over your children and use them as leverage to loot and criminalize you. The first principle and first action of divorce court is to separate children as much as possible. This is not cynicism. It is simply the way that the system operates. Nothing is served by directing anger against the judge or lawyers. They too are effectively prisoners of the system, albeit well-paid ones. Any judge or lawyer who tries to administer honest justice will himself be punished. This is why they cannot be persuaded by logic or morality. If the courts do not seize control over your children, they have no reason to exist. And the huge entourage of functionaries they employ would have no work. And never waste your time, money, or sanity trying to obtain justice from the courts. You will fail.
Okay, so is that the heart of your case, that you recommend men shouldn't get married because the risk of what you'd see as an unfair divorce settlement is too high?
It's not. Well, the settlement, I mean, there's the being deprived, denied access to your children. I mean, I know men who've spent upwards of £500,000 Richard, if their children have failed. The male suicide rate is already 3.5 times the female suicide rate in the UK. Following divorce, it triples. The female divorce rate doesn't increase. This is denying a father access to his children is child abuse. It's abuse of the child's father, because in 90% of cases it will be the father. The child's grandparents, great grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, and friends. It is such an outrageous system that as an MRA we have to tell men, you would be insane to sign this non-contract.
Okay, I'll come back on a few of those things. Now let's go back to the parachuting analogy for a start. There's three things that are very important differences that make that analogy unhelpful, I would suggest. For a start, it's a risk of death. So I think that's over dramatizing the situation.
Richard, I'm sorry.
I know what you're going to say. You're going to say about people committing suicide, but with that, it was a 50% chance of death. So that's obviously.
Yes, I'm sorry, Richard. Sorry. You broke up then. But I refer you back to the fact that the male suicide rate triples. So there are a lot of deaths that result from divorce.
Yeah, in your parachute analogy, though, half of the people end up dead. I think another problem with the parachute analogy is it's a randomized situation. So you're putting the parachute on and jumping out of the plane, and you have no control at all over the process. So it is just like rolling the dice. Whereas with a marriage, choosing a marriage partner and working to make a marriage work isn't a random process like that. The other problem with the analogy is it was raising money for the Scottish Family Party, which is obviously a very noble cause indeed. But compared to forming a lifelong partnership and forming a family, that's quite a trivial thing. What do you think about those with your analogy?
No, interesting points. But I mean, the point of the metaphor, Richard, is about the advisability of jumping.
Mm-hmm.
They are taking a considerable risk, and they are also assuming that the woman that they are marrying is doing so in good faith, not with an eye to their fortune.
Right. Well, I'll come to that in a minute. Going back to the court, I think what you were saying about the judges. I mean, the judges, they get paid for doing their job. They don't get a bonus for doing their job badly. So I agree that there are very serious problems in family courts, and I think a lot of men do get a raw deal, and there's various reasons for that. So I agree on that point. I think the quotation you read was too cynical. It was also almost a bit conspiracy-ish, that these people who are deliberately out to do it, that they're gaining something from the process. I just think there's biases and problems in the system. But my big point is, if you're saying to people, therefore, don't get married, just to suggest that they don't set up home and start a family, or people should cohabit, or just leave women alone completely.
Well, there's a spectrum there, isn't there? But the question, the question comes down to one of human rights. Are we really saying that men should take those risks? And as a men's rights activist, the best way not to lose the game is not to play the game. I would much rather, Richard, that the courts were not. I mean, the purpose of the courts is to separate children from fathers. I mean, Professor Baskerville, could not have been clearer. I mean, every men's rights activist I know, and pretty well every divorced man I know, is very clear that it's not that the family court system is broken, Richard. The whole intention is to separate fathers and children so as to loot and criminalize fathers.
Well, I think that's an overly dramatic thing to say. The system's flawed and biased and unfair in many cases. But so what would you recommend to it? So a man, met a woman, they want to start a family. Would you recommend they should just cohabit, move in together, have kids, but just don't get married?
No, because I think the risks of being denied access to your children and being, certainly there would be lower risks if they didn't have children. But if they have children, the family courts, whether they're married or not, will still destroy the man.
Right. So your advice would be to not form that relationship at all. But basically don't have children.
No, I'm saying cohabiting is lesser of the two evils, I guess.
Right. I think the dangers of cohabiting are enormous, because basically the relationship breakup rate with cohabiting is far, far, far higher than with marriage. So marriage is very effective at enabling people to form stable, successful relationships in which to bring up their children in particular. So if people go into cohabiting instead, that's going to result in far more family breakdown, far more of the emotional trauma, far more harm to children through that process. I mean, that's a pretty serious price to pay, isn't it?
Right, but Richard, the thing I'm not hearing from you is forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't get any sense that you realise that men are humans, and they should have human rights, and because of the way the family courts operate, they are denied their human rights. Their children are denied their human rights, and you're basically saying men should just take it, take that risk.
No. Well, I do realise men are human from personal experience, I hope. So that's fine. But I've said I agree that there are problems with the family courts. I agree with that. But I think that's, in the grand scheme of things, it's a big problem, but it's not a problem that outweighs the whole benefits of marriage and justifies steering people down a road that's far more damaging and risky to themselves, their partners, to children, and to the state, because it leads to far greater relationship instability.
All I can say, Richard, is tell that to the men who've been destroyed emotionally, financially, and in other ways through the family courts, that they should, it is an unacceptable risk. There's no, I mean, I'm looking at this through partly and if you look at it through that lens, Richard, the risks are simply too high.
Well, how about the risks on the other side? That the huge, if everyone took your advice, as
they should.
Yeah. So there's no marriages anymore. Then relationship breakdown would absolutely skyrocket, and all of the problems for adults and particularly for children, all the problems associated with it would skyrocket as well.
But that's not going to happen, Richard. We both know that, because men and women are hardwired to pair bond. What I'm saying is that at the individual level, the risks, thanks to the family court system, the risks to men of just being destroyed, I say emotionally and financially, simply don't make it worthwhile. I mean, it's all very well to say society this, but where does that leave the individual man? It just says you have to accept that risk.
Sorry,
Richard, can I come on to onto another issue? That is, and it's something that relaunching, as you know, possibly in April, as the Children and Families Party. And in a number of areas, we're sort of leaning towards the principle that prevention is better than cure. And what I'm thinking of here with regards to marriage is that I think the state should offer something. And I'm not somebody who thinks that the state should do more generally, but a lot less. But I think it's quite. I was very impressed when I was by a book written in 2000 by an American called Jeffrey Larson. It's entitled "Should We Stay Together?" And I think one of the keys to reducing the number of divorces and the number of children with single parents is reducing the number of marriages between people who are individually or jointly unsuited to the institution. And it was only in writing my book that it dawned on me, after reading many books, that the chance of my second marriage in particular being a happy and a successful one were close to zero. Love is Blind. There's a very good book called Lovesick by the psychologist Frank Tallis, in which he explains that romantic love is basically a mental illness required to get people to men in particular to pair bond and have children.
Could you just say about that? I think that is, I mean, frankly, that's just, to describe romantic love as a mental illness is just, I'm trying to restrain. I'm trying to think of words to use that are maybe not excessive, but I think that is just totally and utterly ludicrous and utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, Richard.
Something that in most people's experience is a very positive experience, leads them into a lifelong relationship, leads them into family, to sustaining the, to procreation, a growing family in the future. For many people, the most important and meaningful aspect of their lives, as someone describes it as a mental illness.
No, Richard, you say many people, and that's undoubtedly true, but 50% of marriages end in divorce. Those that don't end in divorce are unhappy, and I think we need as a society to realise that it's all very well holding up marriage as some sort of wonderful thing, but for many people it is not a source of happiness. But the point I want to make is that given the costs of marital and family breakdown to the society, I think there should be compulsory and taxpayer-funded premarital counselling and assessments of the likelihood of marriage before marriage licenses are handed out. Now, had I gone through that process before my second marriage, hopefully I would have been sensible enough to say this is not going to work.
Yeah, I think the idea of premarital counselling, people considering their compatibility, I think they're good things. I would be fearful of the state stepping in. I mean, if the Scottish government tried to do that, they would not be able to resist. There would have to be a session about gender stereotyping. There would be all their standard messages would have to go in there. So I wouldn't trust the government to do that. But I think a culture that encourages people to go through some sort of marriage preparation program. I think often when people get married in a church, they often have that. When people get married in other contexts, they often don't have that. So I think there could be a place for maybe the state subsidizing or encouraging that in some ways. Yeah, so I think that could be very positive. But remember, if people don't get married, you've got to be clear what the alternative is. So if you're saying they don't get married and just cohabit instead, then there's every reason to think that's going to lead to less positive outcomes. If relationship breakdown is a traumatic, dangerous thing, then if people cohabit rather than marry, there's going to be more of that going on.
Richard, I wonder if I could talk about marriage risk factors. You've read my book, The Marriage Delusion, The Fraud of the Rings, for which thank you very much. I'd like to make an offer to people watching this video. It retails for £20, but I'm offering it tonight for a £5 discount, so £15, and I'll cover postage and package. If people send me £15 through PayPal, perhaps like people come on my website, which is the URL is just here. I must have read, I think, 40 books, Richard. I wrote it after my second marriage failed, and it was genuinely, I thought I will not be able to go through this a third time. I would not survive it a third time. So I thought, what is it about marriage that I have such a problem with? And it slowly dawned on me after doing a lot of research that there are at least 3 marriage risk factors. And the more of them that a person has, the more likely they are to struggle to find happiness in marriage. The first is the somewhat misunderstood personality trait which is a personality trait of a little more than 50% of men and a little less than 50% of women. Now, I'm a pretty extreme introvert, and I'm very happy to be, actually. But one of the consequences, I believe, was that marriage was always going to be challenging to me. The second marriage risk factor is not sharing a religious faith with a spouse. I'm not religious, but it seems to be obvious that jointly believing a divine being wishes the marriage to last must help in difficult times, I imagine. You see that. And the final risk factor, and I'm sure you love this one, Richard, is being a man. Monogamous marriage is intrinsically, and your video on this, I think, is very good, Richard, when you talk about the contract of marriage. Monogamous marriage is intrinsically a less attractive prospect for men than women, which may explain something that we see all the time, that why women's female friends get very excited when the women tell them they're engaged. whereas the men's male friends commiserate with the engaged man, which
Right. I've never
amuses me beyond
experienced that.
understanding.
I would
Before we
say
get
in
to
the
what
circles I've been in, it's completely the opposite. Completely the
we
opposite.
move in different
People
circles, Richard.
people
We move
rejoice
in different circles.
at an
Okay.
engagement.
Okay.
Just reply to. Can I reply to some of those?
Of course, Richard.
I think the introversion issue. I know in your book you say that it's no good saying to people, you work harder. If you're just the wrong personality type, it's not going to work. I mean, men's sheds. That's a sort of cultural phenomenon. I mean, the idea that's somewhere man cave. That's what I mean. Sorry, man cave. That's somewhere where men go away when they're fed up of being talked to and they just want a bit of quiet on their own. So I think when you've got different personalities like that, then couples can work out arrangements, habits, whatever, that are going to accommodate different personality types. So I believe with goodwill on both sides, then that can be worked out. It might not be easy, but it can be worked out. In terms of the strong religious conviction, I think religious conviction will often take marriage into the moral realm. So if you've got people who believe it would be the wrong thing to do to divorce, okay, it might be necessary in some situation, but each as an individual is thinking they've got to do everything they can to make things work. Then obviously like you were saying, that's going to help to make the marriage more resilient. But in terms of being male, that's very interesting, because I absolutely agree with you, because I think marriage is basically designed to get men to behave the way that women want them to and need them to. So which I think is absolutely fine. And the longer term, it's also what's best for men as well. But men often don't realize that so much. So it is designed. So the restrictions of marriage do tend to be felt more severely by men. But I still think it's noble, it's admirable of men if they do accept those, if they do live by the principles of marriage, despite the temptations they might experience at some points not to. Maybe as a men's rights activist, the fact that marriage, I would say its purpose fundamentally is to get men to behave the way that women want them to. Do you think there's a problem with that, or are you happy with that?
No, I think you've put your finger on one of the problems.
Why is it a problem? Why is that a problem?
Can I just go back to the point? Well, because I don't think that men should be subjects, not in the natural order of things, and I think it leads to utter misery, as we see from the growth of feminism. But I'd like to go back to the point you were making about if both parties act in good faith. I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I've lost count of the number of divorced men who told me that their partner would not work in good faith to save the marriage, and in many cases the result was their ex-wives filing for divorce and ending up with a house, the kids, the Medio flats. There was no, the assumption there's always going to be goodwill on both sides. I think is a fairly optimistic one, Richard.
Yeah, I think that's the ideal. You've got to select partners wisely. But the failure is not with the institution of marriage. The failure is potentially with one of the partners who either wasn't sincere when they went into the marriage, or more likely has got the wrong attitude within the marriage. They've got the attitude that, oh, well, so it goes. If it doesn't suit me, I'm going to leave. We'll get divorced and I'll go and start a new life somewhere. Whereas, so basically the problem isn't that the culture of marriage is too strong. The problem is the culture of marriage is too weak, that leads people to think it's acceptable to think like that there is the option that you can just give up and walk away if it's not quite suiting you, or if there looks like a better option, or you fancy a different life. Richard, that's the problem, people not upholding the principles of marriage.
To my mind, a far bigger problem is the incentivization by the state and the judiciary of women to torpedo their marriages.
Yeah, I would say it's quite rare that women cynically get divorced for financial gain. I think often divorce proceedings get bitter, and then there's various issues with the court. Then it does end up confrontational, and I think in a lot of cases then men are treated unfairly. I agree with that. But that's
if we park to one side, Richard, the issue of needing to provide for and give accommodation to children. Let's talk about marriages where there are no children. Why, in the name of heaven, should assets be split evenly when the man that's probably, on average, would have paid for 3/4 of the joint assets? Why should he not then get 3/4 of the assets that he's paid
But
for?
we could talk about that. I mean, your proposals in your book about this, about the rules that would help fair division of wealth on divorce. I think some of those sounded sensible. I think there might be something helpful in the fact that people don't quite know how a divorce would work out. If there were set rules, then you might find people would be a bit more calculating and think, yeah, I'm going to get divorced. I know what's going to happen. That looks good enough for me. I'm going to do it. So the fact that it is a bit fluid might have its positive sides as well. But I would say with marriage has got a crucial, you said leaving children aside. Well, that's something I'm absolutely unwilling to do, because that's one of the central purposes of marriage is to provide children with the ideal context being brought up by their mum and dad. So for me, that's the central thing, where it seems for you, some of the problems that exist when marriages break down are the central thing. Whereas as far as I'm concerned, a far, far weightier issue is the enhancing of stable relationships and creating this ideal context for children. That's a far weightier issue than these very real problems when things go wrong.
And yet they go wrong 50% of the time, Richard, don't they? So we can't just brush that under the carpet.
But how much of that problem is a problem with the institution of marriage, and how much of that problem is with the individuals concerned? Because I think, and also with the fact that divorce is so easy as well. I think if there was a stronger culture of marriage, people understood that better, and that was the ethos in our society, then I think the success rate of marriages would increase very, very significantly. If you look at other countries around the world, divorce rates vary massively from country to country. And I think the difference is a cultural one. So what's happening in our culture is we've got a very decayed culture of marriage, a very weakened culture of marriage. And one of the manifestations of that is a high divorce rate. So if the culture of marriage was strengthened, then I believe the divorce rate would go down very significantly.
The divorce rate would come down very significantly if women weren't incentivized to divorce. I mean, it's no accident, Richard, that 3 out of 4 people, spouses who serve divorce papers, are women, because they are incentivized to do so. And the family court system, I go back to Professor Baskerville, the family court system is devised to separate men from their resources through the children.
No, it's not devised for that purpose. That's not true. No one sat down and said, right, what we want is to create a legal process that's going to separate men from money and children. Right, let's see how we can do it. Let's get this system operating. It wasn't devised to do that. It might operate in that way in a lot of cases, but it wasn't devised to do that.
It doesn't matter what was devised, Richard. The reality is that's how, for decades, the family courts have operated.
The other thing I would say as well, I think it's too cynical, because it sounds like you're saying that a very high proportion of women seeking divorce are doing it for financial reasons, whereas I think it will be a very small proportion of women seeking a divorce who are motivated by finance. I think once the procedure gets going, the court gets involved, then things can go wrong in various ways. But I don't think it's true that there are huge numbers of women deciding to get deciding to get divorced because they think they're going to make money out of it.
Yeah, I've got to say that something that is true of most social conservatives, Richard, and I think you describe yourself as one, is they are very gynocentric, very chivalrous, do not have a realistic view of women's intentions and motivations, and it just will not hold women accountable in the way that women should be held accountable. And we see it, for example, you and I are pro-lifers. 10 million unborn children have been killed in the UK, as you know, over the last 50 or so, 45 years.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere is someone saying no. Sorry, let me take another area, Richard, which is probably better for this. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which I don't think is in your manifesto. 1 in 6 unborn children are affected by it. 1 in 6 through women who are told at the outset, do not drink, you will be damaging your baby, do it anyway. And I don't see anybody on either social conservatives or liberals saying how do we stop 1 in 6 babies being harmed by alcohol? Nobody's doing it because nobody will hold women properly accountable. And we see that everywhere. Something like 5 out of 6 men in British prisons today would not be there if they were treated with the same leniency as women. We have to be honest about women. Otherwise, I think we'll get nowhere. And marriage is just one area.
In terms of marriages, I think I wouldn't want to make a gender distinction. I think some men go into marriage or act within marriages in a very selfish way or destructive way to the relationship, and some women do as well. I think that's just human nature.
Well, can I just go back to hypergamy, Richard? This absolutely deep-seated desire of women to marry up. As women have got more and more money from employment, they have actually become more hypergamous. Which means that, I mean, working class men today have a very poor prospect of ever marrying, because working class women can either marry up or be funded by taxpayers.
Yeah.
So basically, these women are being supported by the taxes of men that they wouldn't touch with barge poles as partners, and that's a problem.
I think there is a wider problem. Yeah, that men's income is a strong predictor of marriage rates. Basically, like the average male wage correlates strongly with marriage rates. And I think the effect that you're saying, where women in general do tend to seek higher earning or wealthier partners, that's certainly true. Again, that's not something I particularly have a problem with. I don't think male-female relationships should be entirely symmetrical. And I think the fact that women in general seem to seek a man who's going to be able to provide some sort of standard of living, I think that's perfectly reasonable. That's fine. And as you say, changes in society have resulted in creating a situation where the marriages are less likely to happen for the reasons you say. But how does that relate to marriage? Is that part of an argument against marriage, or was that just a?
Well, I think women having more money has led to a high proportion of women has led to a high proportion of men not being in the marriage market. And which if you're pro-marriage, I mean, I don't know how you would address that problem. I mean, surely it would trouble you that more and more men are simply not marriageable.
Yes, I think that it is an issue. I mean, for example, if you look at the people on the other side, very much of the spectrum, their concern is the gender pay gap. So what they want is for women to be paid more and basically men to be paid less, even though in actual fact, the consequence of that will be less relationships forming, less marriages taking place. So I think that's a very genuine issue.
Yeah.
It's not an argument against marriage, though, is it? It's not on our topic tonight.
So, Richard, can we very quickly touch on the gender pay gap? The gender pay gap is
can we stick on marriage?
Okay.
Issues. Are there any other? Can I just go back to what you're saying about men and the natural order? When I was saying about men in particular being restrained by the conditions of marriage, sexually constrained to be committed in an exclusive relationship, and were you saying that that's against the natural order?
It's against men's biology. I'm not saying that men shouldn't. For me, it's not a reason not to marry. I mean, there's plenty of other reasons, but I don't think women. It's an interesting thing, Richard. What, 40 or 50 years, I guess. All the things that the feminists were campaigning for, they've got them all. Women are today less happy than they've ever been. They've got all these things, but they're not happy, which kind of suggests that what feminists want for women is not what women want for women.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, statistics about women's happiness have been declining since the 1950s. And also, as you say, small percentages of women describe themselves as feminists. So it is bizarre that the feminists who dominate politics and the media and education think they're representing women, but they often aren't. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I don't think they care a damn, Richard. I mean,
another mistake feminists make is feminists think that marriage is sort of patriarchal and bad for women, whereas they're completely wrong. Marriage is, as I say, it's really designed to get men to behave the way that the women want and need them to. So the fact that feminists are anti-marriage, I think, is very, very bizarre.
Well, I think it's a long time since I've heard feminists say that. I mean, Jenny Murray famously said that marriage was prostitution, and then got married, ironically.
You certainly get it in the Scottish Parliament.
But you really don't hear feminists today, Richard, talking about marriage being prostitution. Or very few of them will, because they know how much financial enrichment women get from it.
No, there's still a strong anti-marriage feeling among feminists. In the Scottish Parliament, they are in the process of introducing civil partnerships for heterosexual couples. And in the debate for that, the reasons for that was because marriage is patriarchal and sexist and this, that, and the other. So there's lots of people that don't want to have anything to do with it. So we need a sort of bland other version for people who don't like marriage because it's those things.
No, I have to say,
so
Richard,
it is a strong force. I think.
Yeah, I'm hoping, Richard. I think we're going to have another session on feminism, which I'm very much looking forward to. But men's rights activist for over 10 years now, and every feminist narrative that I know of is one or more of the five following things: a baseless conspiracy theory, for example, patriarchy, a fantasy, a lie, a delusion, or a myth. There is not a single narrative, and I include the gender pay gap just very quickly in that actually bears examination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we will have that chat another day. So let's think about marriage from my point of view. So you can reply to my argument in favor of marriage. But my point is that human nature being what it is, men and women want to form a relationship. They want to have children. They want to basically they want to live together, enter into domestic arrangements. So that's not going to change. That's just hardwired in. And the species is finished if that's not going to happen. We need that to be happening. So that's something that's going to happen. So the question is, how is it going to happen? How is that going to be structured and regulated? Now, the evidence is that if that's left as a free-for-all, then things don't work out well at all, particularly for children, especially for children. Things tend to go disastrously wrong at a scale that costs societies billions of pounds having to try to pick up the pieces. So bearing in mind that as human nature, that people are going to enter into this type of relationship, then if there's a structure that could be put around that, if there could be a cultural institution that people regard as the best way to enter into this type of relationship, and if that cultural institution leads to better outcomes for those relationships, then I think that's something that obviously should be encouraged. But you talk about divorce rates. Divorce rates are nothing compared to the split-up rate for cohabiting couples. And also, when we're assessing marriage in our society, we've got to remember we're talking about marriage in a society that doesn't really understand marriage. The culture of marriage is very much decayed. I mean, the ideal of marriage, as far as this is not family party policy, this is not my opinion, but the ideal of marriage is that people move in when they get married and start having sex when they get married, and they've made a serious lifelong commitment to each other that they're utterly determined to keep. So those three things will all go together. So that's the ideal of marriage. What proportion of marriages in Scotland or Britain fulfill that ideal? I would suggest it's probably about under 5%, I would say. So a lot of people who do get married, they don't make a big decision to get married. They slide into marriage. They cohabit. Oh, we've got a kid on the way. Shall we keep it? Oh, yeah, I suppose we should. Yeah, let's keep the kid. Shall we get married? Yeah, maybe in a few years. Okay, well, let's see. Then eventually they decide to get married. They just slide into it, and there's no big decision. And the reason marriage like that doesn't work is because with marriage, it ties together the three things: sex, commitment, and domesticity. So if someone's mind, those three things are part of a package, they go together. That's the deal with marriage. Then if there's a problem with one of the areas, then you think of the others, and it strengthens the whole thing. But if you think they're separable, so if the bloke thinks, oh, right, sex, well, I don't need to be married to have sex, I can get that somewhere else, then they're less committed to the relationship in general, and they're less willing to, say, persevere with domestic problems if they're thinking, oh, I'm just going to go off and have sex somewhere else. But if someone sees those things as part of the same package, then that's much stronger. And the public commitment element, the fact that get all your friends and family together, make these solemn promises before them, that's a very powerful thing. It has a very powerful effect. And that's one of the reasons why it strengthens the subsequent relationships. So these types of relationships are going to happen. And all the evidence is that marriage, especially the ideal of marriage as I described it, tends to produce the best results from it. And it's not the best results in some trivial sort of side aspect of life. Produces the best results in what for most people is the most important central theme of their lives.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that, Richard, but you're saying, I think, tell me if I get this wrong, if I got this wrong, that you think only 5% fit that ideal. Well, it kind of suggests there's either something wrong with 95% of the population, or it's an ideal that today, at least, people cannot live up to.
I wouldn't say that people can't live up to it. It's just that the culture isn't even sharing with people what the expectation should be. It isn't even there in the culture for most people. You talk in your book about like close-knit religious communities. I would say within some church communities, that is the culture. And everyone knows that, and people live by it, and I think the benefits are apparent. I mean, more widely, when a family party policy is, for example, in sex education, you would teach children the facts about marriage, and you teach them, for example, that these are the rates of relationship breakdown for people who are married or not married. These are the rates of relationship breakdown for people who have sex before they're married and people who wait until they're married. These are the rates of relationship breakdown for people who have however many sexual partners before marriage, just so young people can see the facts and see that just to help them to make their own decisions. In a sense, you don't need to moralize. You can just present the facts, and they're so stark that it really would make people think, oh, hang on a minute, if I really want things to work out in this area of my life, maybe these are the choices I ought to make. I think that's the idea. I think at some points in history, that culture has been, that's just been through society. No one was having to enforce it particularly. That was just the general understanding of marriage and sexual relationships in society. Whereas that's decayed and decayed and decayed. Whereas to a lot of people now, that they just think a wedding is a nice romantic day to have. It's a special party with your friends.
I agree, Richard. No, but I mean, you clearly have an Everest to climb here, to put it mildly. But I'd like to. I mean, my suspicion is that most couples devote far more time and attention to the wedding day than the 50 or 70 years. I mean, how much time does a couple, let's say in their mid-20s, give to the fact they might be together for half a century? I mean, I don't suppose it even occurs to them.
Yeah. I used to be someone who thought, oh, all the effort and fuss that goes into wedding days, what a waste of money, what a waste of time. I tend not to think that now. I tend to think the bigger an event that is, and the more effort that goes into it, what that communicates, particularly to the couple getting married, is that everyone involved in this thinks this is a really big deal, and we're not expecting to have to do it again. That this is it. That this is a massive
right. But that doesn't exactly work, does it, Richard? I mean, I'd make it compulsory for weddings to take place at the fresh fish counter of the local supermarket. Quite frankly, take all the bloody stuff out of it. Have it cost virtually nothing, and then so stop incentivizing people. I mean, especially a girl or a woman who wants to be a princess for a day. How many people marry just so that a young woman can be a princess for the day.
Yeah, so that's an inadequate understanding of marriage that some people have, and that's something we need to address. I mean, you said that's a mountain to climb, like climbing Everest, but it is a mountain to climb. It is a mountain to climb. But on the other hand, in terms of politics, if you're looking to solve problems within our society, it's a mountain that has to be climbed, because so many problems, this is what's fundamentally at the root of them, is family breakdown or family dysfunction. So if you're serious about politics and wanted to make an improvement in society, then it's a mountain you've got to try and climb, no matter how difficult it is.
I'd just like to come on, Richard, to a lot of women who are affected by what some MRAs call the marriage strike. So men will look at marriage, especially men with money, who tend to be the focus of women who want to get married, and say, no, absolutely no way am I doing that. The risks are awful. And the way, so there's plenty of women who would marry, but they cannot find partners. So I mean, surely it makes sense to stop making marriage so risky for men, so as to encourage them to take that leap.
Yeah, I'll say that the proposal you had for making divorce settlements fairer, I've got some time for those. On the other hand, though, I think part of the culture of marriage has got to be the assumption that it's for life. That's why it works. Marriage works because it is a lifelong commitment. And I know one of the things you've suggested is like fixed term marriage contracts. But I think that would completely take away the purpose of marriage, because the point of marriage is it then makes the relationship one in which the two people are thinking, we have to work things out because we've committed to each other for life, so we've got to sort it out. As soon as you make it a fixed term contract, then that key feature of marriage isn't there anymore. It will then be, oh, well, we'll see how it goes. I know there's a get out in 3 years. I'll see. I'll try a bit, but I'm actually thinking maybe I'll just go and try and meet someone else. So I think that assumption of permanence and promise of permanence is a really fundamental aspect of marriage. So with prenuptial agreements, I can see the logic. I can see why people might be concerned about those. But my problem with those is that it's undermining the spirit of commitment behind the marriage, because it's already taken into account the possibility of divorce. And I just think that's a really unhelpful thing to be introducing at that stage of a marriage.
Right, but that possibility exists. It's a question of whether one's idealistic or realistic, I think, Richard. Richard, I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes, as you know.
Yes,
but I'd just like to very quickly recommend a book which is by William Collins, and it's got a lot of material on marriage and divorce. William is a very happily married man in his, I think it is mid 60s. The book is 675 pages long. It's quite a heavy thing, and it's about £24 on Amazon for the paperback. But the ebook, which I'd very strongly recommend people get, is only about £4. And of course, you can read ebooks. You don't need an ebook reader. You can read it on your computer, phone, tablet, you name it. And but as a book with lots of statistics around marriage, divorce, the family courts, I don't think it's. I don't know another book which is so full of information.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for doing this, Mike. I know you need to go. It's just 5:02. People watching, don't go yet. We've got 5 minutes left. I'll have a look at some of the comments. We can have a final chat. But Mike, we will have you back on again, and we'll agree about lots of things.
Okay,
time.
Richard.
But that was very interesting.
Enjoyed that.
Thanks very
for
much.
having me on.
Right.
Okay.
Good, nice. Okay, let's have a look at a few comments. Right, that's someone. Right, that's Phil recommended the Empathy Gap book. I've actually got it here. I haven't read it yet. It's quite a brick, but I will get through that. Let's have a look. Right, Mark. I got married when I was in my mid-30s, mainly because I felt my clock ticking down. I wish I got married in my early 20s now and had the knowledge I have now with regards to suitable partners. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a good point. I think there's a lot of very good advice about selecting partners. I mean, some people's strategy for selecting their marriage partner is something like this. go to a nightclub, get drunk, get chatting to some girl you fancy, persuade her or give her enough to drink so you can get back to her flat and have sex, and then see her for a bit longer. The sex is so exciting, even though you maybe not actually getting on that well, you're not actually that suited, you're just caught up in that. And then maybe a couple of months down the line, oh, she's pregnant. All right, we're having a baby. All right, okay, so we'll have a baby together. And okay, we'll maybe get married. So there wasn't a lot of rational decision making in the process there. Now that's an extreme example, but I think for quite a few people, that's not too far off the case. So I think advice about selecting partners, I think, would be very helpful. I don't know if you agree. I think the idea of the state getting involved in this, in marriage preparation or marriage, I just think it's a nice idea, but I would just dread to think what they come up with. It would be terrible. Right, Bruce wasn't too sexist ramblings from Mike. Hope he finds peace with himself soon. Well, when Mike comes on again, you can ask him about that. And I feel with I was about to say something I won't say. That's maybe not quite fair, right? Let's find some others. Right, in the traveller community, they marry very young and have had successful relationships. They promote marriage strongly. Something I like about that community. Again, the church I go to, there's loads and loads of young people. And the culture there seems to be, people get married in their mid-20s generally. And, and they have kids pretty soon after. I think that's great. John, when I got married, it did not occur to me that it wouldn't be for life. I can't understand or relate to Mike's scenarios. I would agree absolutely, Mike. That would be my take as well. I think the idea of going into marriage and having in your mind at all, let alone as a serious consideration, or what about if it doesn't work? I think if you're thinking that, surely you shouldn't go ahead with the marriage. You go ahead with the marriage when you're convinced this is the right person. I say that's not to say that people might change. You never know what might happen in the future, but that's a good point. Women are all different. Yes, yeah, that's a very valid point. I would. It's not fair talking about Mike when he's not here. I did feel that Mike was generalizing somewhat about women. Weddings are far too expensive. I mean, it is possible to get married relatively cheaply. When I got married, we started off with a plan that we were going to sort of do it on the cheap a little bit. We're going to keep things fairly simple. But then one way or another, when we started planning, it didn't happen at all. And it ended up, as lavish as, most people's weddings, I think. But I think there is a case that spending a lot of money does communicate, though, that this is a really big deal. We all think this is really important. And we also think this is going to be the one and only as well. So, yeah. Right, evening. Right. No, it's necessary to keep a sense of sacrament and covenant commitment publicly celebrated. I absolutely agree. I think the public celebration aspect, the public aspect, public commitment is really crucial. Like, if you're going on a diet or something, if you were to invite all your friends and family there and stand up in front of them and say, I am never going to eat a packet of crisps again for the rest of my life. Now, if you're with some of them a few weeks later and you were going to say, oh, can I have some crisps, please? You'd feel a bit of an idiot, wouldn't it? You'd feel as if you're saying, I'm really weak-willed and feeble and you can't really trust me. It's sort of embarrassing. So human nature means that when you make a commitment in front of people, you want to live up to it. It's embarrassing not to. You worry how that will reflect on you. And I think that's an important part of marriage. Weddings have become commercialized. I mean, that's certainly true. As soon as anything's involved in a wedding, that gets an extra zero on the end of a price, doesn't it? I'm not sure how that happens. You'd think the market would adjust, but maybe people, well, generally only get married once. So maybe the market doesn't function very well because people are caught up in the excitement of their one big day and they don't shop around, whatever. But that's very interesting. Right, let's just get one more and then we're done. Right, Mark again. There are a lot of moral issues that need to be fixed before marriage can once more be the foundation for life in this country. Right, that's interesting. I agree that the culture of marriage is linked in with a lot of other moral issues as well. Something I didn't talk about tonight, but I do think it's interesting. If you take, for example, someone being brought up in the education system as it is now, and let's say you've got some boy who's a bit cocky and is in the habit of, mouthing off, not doing as he's told, being completely unreasonable, being really rude to his teachers, and it basically gets away with it. Nothing, has the occasional restorative conversation. In other words, he gets away with it. So how is that person going to be as a marriage partner? Okay, very possibly not great, because they're not used to restraining themselves. They're not used to having to be reasonable with another person. So I think that's a very significant factor in divorce rates, in relational stability in a nation, is the character of its people. And I think education is quite an important aspect of that. Right, there are lots of other comments that are very interesting, but I'm going to stick to time as usual. So I will finish there. Do tune in next week. Thanks for being with us tonight. Thanks if you're watching later as well. And see you next week. Right, good night.